thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Suzanne Killian, and I'm the Academy Lead for Healthcare at the Center for the Business of Health. And tonight we are so fortunate that the Center of Business of Health Career Network's Fireside Chat tonight is with our wonderful alum, Jeff Hoffman, and he is a senior managing director with Guggenheim Securities, but he is here tonight to kind of share a lot of different facets of his experiences with you, no matter if you're an undergrad, if you're an MBA student, a grad student, or just somebody who is IB curious in the healthcare sphere. So we're so glad to have Jeff here tonight. I'm actually going to pop in the chat our Career Network's website, just in case you'd like to explore more. But tonight, I'd just like to start with Jeff telling us a little bit about himself, a little bit about his education and how he got to where he is today.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks everyone for joining. My son is on, so he can hold me accountable for all this as an assured admit in the undergrad. And he's heard me ramble before. So if I ramble, just cut me off, ask questions, whatever. But my background is I was an undergrad at Carolina. I went to Goldman Sachs and did the 2-year analyst program out of undergrad. Spent a year in New York, year in Los Angeles. Came back to Chapel Hill and got my MBA because I was an undergrad liberal arts major. And back then, people were supposed to go back to get their MBA, and the 2-year analyst program was more of a feeder to MBA school than it was to a career path. In today's world, the analyst program, a lot of times you go directly on as an associate. So less people going on to get their MBA if they start in the investment bank, although we do hire a lot of MBAs directly into the program too. So I went to Goldman, did 2 years there, went back, got my MBA. And then I always wanted to go back to the West Coast. So went back to Goldman in New York for a while, tried to transfer to the West Coast. They didn't have a big presence back then. I went to a small firm, Montgomery Securities, in about 1995 when I went to San Francisco and started doing medical devices at that point. And since then went back to a big firm at JP Morgan in 2006. And then the last 7 years, I have been at Guggenheim. And I run the medical device effort there with my partner, Joe Coles, who used to run Bank of America's Global Healthcare Group. So I've been at big firms, small firms, through the ups and downs of the markets, been doing it way too long, a little bit more on the back end of my career. So a lot of our younger partners are doing more of the new spade work, and my senior partner and myself are focused on a smaller group of clients and sort of handing over the practice to them. So it's been a long career and I'm still doing it and still active, but slowing down a little bit, which is nice. Recently moved to Austin, Texas, as my kids are off to college, and splitting my time between Park City and Austin with the remote. And we set up a little office in Austin for a couple of us down there. So that's the educational background and the career background. I'll pause if there are any questions. Is it? You are on mute, Suzanne.
I am, thank you. Any questions to start off, anybody?
Everyone's getting ready for the game because we got a small group.
Yeah, well, hopefully more folks will be joining, but I will actually just talk a little bit about how we'll run the fireside chat. So I do have a few more moderator questions, but you're free to raise your hand at any time or just shout out. Sometimes when you go off mute, it's easier for us to see you because sometimes I can't see everybody. If you want to put something in the chat, feel free to do that as well. But we'll also pause every couple of questions so that you guys could ask some of your own. So at this point in time, though, does anybody have one question they want to ask about anything? Again, preparing for that game, but if not, we do have some interest in knowing a little bit more about the skills, abilities, experiences that you use on a daily basis, because sometimes you can see job descriptions that'll say you need these skills, you need these experiences, but you get in the job and the real meat of the job is something totally different. So can you tell us a little bit about through, I know that now you're more mature in your career, but through the different levels, what skills and abilities and experiences were really important to your success?
Yeah, I think that's an easy question, but a hard one, right? In the sense of, you obviously have to have the brains and the intellect to do the job financially, right? There's a lot of analytics involved, and you really need to understand those analytics at a basic level to ultimately advise your clients as you go forward. But you also need to have very good interpersonal skills and ability to relate to people, because if you can do all the math, but you can't explain it to someone, to a CEO or CFO, or what they should be doing, it's not very helpful. So I always remember when I was recruiting at Goldman, we used to go to MIT. I never spent any time asking the MIT people how smart they were, because they were all smarter than me. But some guy described to me an options pricing model that he built. And I asked him, I said, okay, well, assume I'm a CEO who's got naive, not options trading experience, explain it to me. And he could not explain it to me in layman's terms. It was a brilliant model, but that guy needed to be on a sales and trading desk and trading options, right? And doing it that way, but he shouldn't be out doing investment banking and trying to sell a skill set, because you need to advise your clients. So a lot of the time is socializing with the clients, finding out what their needs are, and then doing the analytics to figure out what those right answers are and being able to present it to them. So we used to get asked, I know the questions now in the interview process are very analytical as well, but we used to get the question all the time, are you more bright on the analytics side or the interpersonal side? And my favorite answer was, I'm good at both. You don't have to be brilliant. You don't have to be the world-class expert at either, but you really do need to have both skill sets, I think, to succeed. And you need to have the energy and the go-getterness to push forward. I always tell the most successful people in every level of the job is try to do your job perfectly, and start to try to do the job with a person above you, because you're usually working on lean teams. And if a client can't get a hold of me, they're going to go to the next person on my team. And we find the analysts and associates talking to clients quickly. And we want you to be smart enough to answer, but not hang yourself if you don't know the answer, and be able to I got to go back and revert to my team and get you the answer. But you will be at a very young age in your career over your head at times, dealing with people. So you need to be aggressive, not just do what you're told. You need to learn and sort of push your way through it. But I think having both a balance of skill sets is critical for this job. Otherwise, it's really challenging one way or the other. If you don't have the analytic skills, it's hard to learn it. And if you don't have the interpersonal skills, it's hard to, move on to the senior levels of the job and sell it.
That's terrific. And I think in a lot of careers, again, that translation, that communication, that building rapport is very important. But those are often more difficult to point students toward places in where they could gain those skills. Like, it's easy to say, take this finance course. Where in your past education or just experiences did you gain those skills so that when you did step into those roles, you could be successful in that manner?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was a liberal arts major, family from two Jewish parents, one lawyer, and a mom who wanted me to be a doctor. So the typical stereotype: go to school, become a lawyer or a doctor. And I hated the labs and chemistry. And I was just basically a liberal arts major, but I took a couple finance classes. I took an accounting class and a finance class, and just realized quickly in undergrad how much I didn't know on the business side, and how important it was compounding interest or just net present value, simple things that a liberal arts person doesn't know. And I told everyone, my son's on, he could tell you, I don't care if you went to med school or if you're going to set up a psychology practice or anything, having business background is going to help you in no matter what you do, whether it's negotiating with insurance companies and how you set up your practice, or knowing if your practice is profitable, or going into the finance world. So I recommend everyone taking some business, just even if it's elementary business in the beginning. And then if you're in the business school and so forth, that's what got me interested in it. So I was at the point with liberal arts, worked really hard, all of a sudden got interested in business, said, all right, I got to go get my MBA. I was quickly told that you need work experience to go get an MBA. And I wasn't really trained for anything in the work experience, being a psychology major with a couple business classes, but realized that the analyst program was where people went for 2 or 3 years before they went back to their MBA. And this was dated, but that's how it sort of worked. And all they cared about when we were interviewing back in the day was really, really motivated people. Like, you didn't have to have any business experience. It helped, but it only helped for the first 3 or 4 months because they basically trained you yourself and it was on the job training. So I really learned 99% of what I learned on the finance side after 2 introductory classes in undergrad in the job itself. More and more today, and I've watched what the younger people do for the interview process, you need to have more analytical financial skills to get through the initial screening process at the investment banks today. So I would say the way I did it will be more the exception today. And you should definitely, if you have an interest in it, take more business classes and have also, there's practice study guides and groups and things that really train you for the interview process in investment banking. And I watched my son go through it, and it's way more rigorous than it was when I was there. When I was there, it was, are you motivated, or you're a hard worker, or any of the top echelon of your sort of extracurriculars and grades? You needed to have both. And I still think that's true. But now they also ask you, it's like consulting. They ask you a lot of case studies and analytical questions. So you need to do your homework and be prepared for the interview process today.
That's great. So where can you learn or gain some knowledge about kind of that translational piece that you spoke of, like turning very, difficult financial information into something that you can translate to a variety of stakeholders? Are there specific co-curriculars that you can recommend?
Look, I felt like the liberal arts classes, when I look back on them, I didn't always find the organizational behaviors of the psychology classes or as, exciting or useful when I was sitting in the class. But I think after the fact, and the team approach to the MBA that we had at Chapel Hill helped, because you have to work how to deal with people. But I hate to say it, but it's almost, you have it or you don't sometimes too. It's a little bit common sense. Like, I see the best people I know in my business to know your stakeholders and know who you're presenting to. So for example, if we're taking a company public, my client wants, if I'm working with a company, they want the highest valuation possible. But the other part of the investment bank is the sales and trading firm who's selling it to the investors who are buying it. They'd like it as cheap as possible so it would trade up. And sometimes we're presenting to the sales force why this is a good company, what it is, and you have to just position it in a way that it looks like it's going to be a good deal. And you pick your comps appropriately. You don't mislead, but you have to show it in a way that makes sense. And you have to find that balance. When you're showing it to the board and your client who thinks they're worth the moon, you also have to show them the right comps and so forth, or why they need to be in these things. But you have to know your audience, and it could be the same information with a different packaging. And if you try to present it the same way to both stakeholders, someone's not going to be happy. And it's a way. It's really, you watch the people who are above you when they're going to meetings and so forth, and see who's good at it and how they convince people. And some people are really good at knowing the high level math and knowing what's a good thing and being salesy. And there's other people who are not good at salesy, but know the analytics so rigorously that they just have the answer to every single question on why it can never fail. My partner and I are like that. We're two different animals, but very good at what we do. But you have to mirror your skill set to it, and also mirror your skill set to what position in the firm. You could be a product partner, which is provide versus a new business generator. And if you're a good salesperson and have the good analytics, you can be a new business generator. If you're very good at the analytics, you could be an M&A banker or a convertible trader or so that helps, support some of the new business people. So knowing your skill sets and having self-awareness, I think, is important. And then a lot of it's the academics is always good, but you got to learn on the job and watch who's good at it and see what they do. And that's why I said you might put a whole book together and be exhausted at the junior level and just you did it and you want to go home and go to sleep. I always tell people the best people are the people that reread the book and try to not just look at their section, look at the whole thing and what are we trying to say, and then ask your senior team members, well, why did we do this, or how does this fit together, or what did you tell them, or how did you get there? And those are the kind of things that I think get you to that next level of understanding and being able to do it better as you get there. So many people want to skip the analytics and go right to the sales part, and so many people aren't good at the sales part and just want to dive into the analytics, and you really got to learn how to be a good presenter. I mean, I was told mid-career to slow down. I talk fast, because I sort of get it, know what I want to say, but you sometimes aren't talking to people that can process it that quickly, and you got to listen more. and you got to listen to what people say. That's probably one of the biggest things. When you're sitting in a room and presenting something, you can't stick your head down and just keep presenting it. You got to listen to the feedback and adjust, because sometimes people need to hear it different ways.
Those are just fantastic points of wisdom for students to look toward, no matter what career they would like to have. And speaking of getting some feedback, I'd love to hear some questions from our virtual audience. All right, Vishwanath. I probably
Hi.
said that wrong.
Yeah, no, my name is Arvin. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Really appreciate it. So I'm actually a incoming summer associate at Credit Suisse next summer. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask was, and you kind of touched upon this, how do you use, I guess, as like an analyst or an associate, how do you really like separate yourself from the rest of the pack? Does it have to do with what you mentioned about being dynamic and just going really above and beyond, you know, what your R&R is, and in the specific case where you talked about, you know, the pitch book, not just working on it and completing the model, but also, you know, really understanding where else value can be added and what else, you know, can you do like up the value chain? Is there any more pieces of advice that you can give?
Look, my advice is to take it serious as a summer and to work hard. I don't think it's great. I mean, it might work with some people. I don't think you want to be, hate to be brash, but like the kiss ass or the, you know, trying to be there every moment of the day. They want well-rounded people who are motivated, working hard, and excited about the job. And so I do think it's doing your job as well as you can do it and taking it seriously and getting it done on time and communicating, because you may have different teams asking you to do different things. And if you can't get something done at the right time, being able to communicate and do that. So do a good job, but I do think it helps to try to be proactive or motivating, in the sense of, you know, and it's a fine line. You don't want to look like you're just pretty, but you know, if you have free time, ask the staff, or where can you help, or do things like that. Maybe if you need some free time to yourself, don't. I mean, I'm not saying doing that every single time, because you work so hard, you need to be able to stick your head up and get a good breath too, and do that. So I just think motivation, asking questions, and always trying to learn while doing your base job as well as you can do it and doing a good job at that is going to show. It's not about competing with the next person. There's always going to be someone smarter and there's always going to be someone worse. I think it's really trying to, you know, be excited. And even when your life is miserable, there are times, you know, they've all been through the misery, but you can talk to your staffers and let them know that you're overwhelmed and you may not get some stuff done. That's different than complaining about the misery, right? Because everyone's sort of been through it. So I think it's always good to keep a positive attitude, but there are resources to go to. I mean, one of the most successful women business, I'll leave her name out of this, but she is probably one of the successful people I know, was an associate at Morgan Stanley back in the day. And there were many tears of how hard she worked. And she's literally stronger and tougher than any business person I've ever seen. So to think back, it's a hard job, right? And it can be overwhelming. So don't take my advice of like, hey, just being positive all the time. If it's overwhelming you, got to let people know. But when you have extra time, you know, it's worth doing a little more and trying to understand. You know, it's reading the Wall Street Journal, understand if you announce a deal, watching the stock price reaction and see if the work you did sort of showed the right way. And so I just think it's doing the little extra effort. It's all it really takes, because doing a good base job and doing a little extra effort to learn shows a lot.
Thank you.
Has a question too.
Hi, yes, thanks, Jeff. Had a question on kind of how your skill sets has evolved from first being an analyst associate to where you are now. I would imagine it's more in a sales role where you're winning mandates or deals with clients. How do you go about cultivating those relationships, and what's your philosophy for putting Guggenheim in the best foot forward?
Yeah, so I was fortunate. When I started at Goldman, I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to, and we didn't have the pre-programmed modeling and so forth that exists in there. So you had to really, like, my bosses made me check things with a calculator. And I would always advise, that doesn't mean you have to check, if you do a model with 10 scenarios, that you need to make sure check every 10 scenarios with a calculator. But knowing how that initial base case works and being able to sit in a meeting, and if you had to, show someone how you calculated it, I think is an unbelievably good skill set to have, in the sense of then you know how the LBO model worked, or the merger model worked, or the accretion dilution worked. Because so my skill set went from learning how to build those models and do it, to being able to look at a model. And if you have two companies with different PE ratios and they merge and it shows one's accretive, you know which one it should be accretive to, the one with the higher multiple. But if you didn't do it by hand in the first place or understand it, you wouldn't recognize it. So I can look at my team's work and go, that doesn't make sense. This company's growing, because I've done all that work. So that's one. So the skill set evolved by really knowing it and really embracing the skills and the analytics at the younger part of your career, but also really understanding what you're telling the client. So I had two bosses when I went to LA. One was literally dotted every I, crossed every T, drove me nuts because he was the most detail-oriented person in the world, which was a great training. The other person was sort of the way I did. He would take the shortest distance between 2 points, but he damn well knew he was going to be right when he went those distances. And he figured out who his constituency was. And if he was trying to convince two companies to merge, he had to believe it himself. He would never try to sell something he didn't believe in. But a lot of companies have sort of either not invented here, or they don't want to do things. If he believed it was good for them, he figured out a way to show them what was important to them. Some clients' stock price is super important to them. So showing them how an analysis or doing something was going to make their stock price more in the next 2 to 3 years was. And so really knowing how to your audience and what to show them became really important to take that analytical skill set as you develop, and that's how you cultivate it. And then, to be honest, I went to a small firm where we just had to go out and call on people. And once you worked on a deal or two, you would go call on people that deal was relevant to, and then you could talk about it to them and you build it. And then as I got even further into my career, it was building a network of people. And as opposed to me doing the primary research, which a lot of bankers do, who are really successful, go figure out all the primary research and come up with this amazing idea and then go pitch it. I built a ton of relationships with my clients after doing a bunch of deals, and I listened to them. And if someone tells me they like that idea, I never breach confidence, but I was like, hey, if you like doing this idea, can I talk to that company about it and tell them why? And then it's really passing information along. And it's much easier to get a piece of business when you know someone's motivated in the first place versus starting from ground zero. So I found success really having a great network of people after I've done that base business over time, and regenerating their ideas and trying to get what they want done happen for them, and doing the math to see if it's going to work. We had a call with a client today. He's got a great core business. It's going, they have a great multiple. We were like, look, we know some other people in the sector whose CEO wants to retire, but it's a great business. They're like, yeah, but we don't need it right now because our business has this much in front of them. But we know this. I said, but this other one may not be available in 2 years when you're ready to do it. So why don't we look at it for you now? And they're like, sure, we'll look at it. We just don't want to overpromise. But they might see that it's so compelling and the opportunity is right now to do it. So it came from a discussion. I didn't just have my team go do this analysis and ship it to them. We got their blessing to do it. And I think that's efficient. And it has a higher hit rate. It's still not the highest because they said we're probably not in the mode for it, but they were receptive. You don't want to do a bunch of work that people aren't receptive because you only have so many hours in the day. And so I think, again, it's a progression of skill set of learning how to understand the analytics, who to sell it to, and then building the relationships, and then fostering that conversation is so critical. That's how I've been successful. I would tell you my partner is a little bit the opposite. He will grind out analysis after analysis after analysis till he finds one that works with his team, and it's pretty hard on the junior team, but he's brilliant and he comes up with something good, and then he'll go pitch it and he'll just keep banging on the door until it happens. It's not the way I do things. I don't enjoy getting into the weeds that much. It's not, because some of it can be just a waste, but he's been every bit as successful as me with a different style. So you have to sort of figure out what works. But my style's been understand the basics, figure out what's a good idea, and then communicate it through my relationships. You got to build up to those relationships though.
Terrific, thanks, great answer. And so again, any more questions? All right, and I'm checking to make sure we've got no hands up. And so I'm going to add a question here because this is tonight we're representing the Center for the Business of Health, and we're talking about life science or healthcare, investment banking, and therefore. Can you tell us a little bit about, and this may have changed throughout the years or maybe since you started, but do students start in more of a generalist role when they go into IB and then move into something more of the life science, healthcare, or an interest area? Or is there the possibility for them to actually go directly into that interest area?
So I think the answer is both, and it depends on the firm. A lot of the firms, and I can just speak to our firm, people become sort of generalists in the summer programs, and then they work with different groups, and the groups sort of recruit them, and they do a matching process sort of after the summer. We're a smaller boutique firm. I know my son's going to JP Morgan next summer, and they are interviewing. They did the interviews to get the offer. Now the groups are basically reaching out to him and interviewing him, and he will get placed directly into a group. So it's what his interest is and who he's talking to, and he'll list a group, a top 3 or 4, and they'll list and they match. So it goes both ways. I do think if you have a specific interest, like you're hell bent on being a healthcare banker, you should let people know that up front. And there are certain firms that either focus on that or have strong practices on that, and you want to do your work, and you let them know early. I will tell you, and I just had this discussion with it, it's not the end all and be all when you're first starting of what group you can be in. I started as a generalist at Goldman. Half my class started in groups, half started as generalists in regions. And I did, a drug deal, a utilities deal, and I met a boss that became my mentor who was electric utilities, and I had no freaking interest in electric utilities. I mean, it's regulated and so forth. He's made billions in it post his career by buying, understanding it. And I just loved working with that team. And that became more important to me than the industry because I enjoyed the finance. I wanted to get to California, and getting in California became more important to me than living in New York. And I didn't get the opportunity at Goldman because they only took one person into a tech group whose wife worked for Intel. And I had another buddy who worked at Morgan Stanley and then a small firm, and said, hey, we got a healthcare opportunity out in California. It's a great group. We're looking for associates. And I transferred out there, and that's how I got into healthcare. And I started doing medical devices in 95, and it's been 25 years since then. And I found it fascinating because we get so much grief in the world right now for being bankers and moving money around and making a lot of money, et cetera. But every company I've worked with has been trying to solve a clinical need too, in addition to making money. And I helped save a friend's mom who was on a cruise who needed a stent put in. And we called Medtronic, who was one of my clients and the biggest heart company in the world, and they called their sales rep in the middle of Spain Islands, and they found a great doctor and put a stent in. So there was more to it than just finance and making money. I've seen all these new technologies come, some fail, some work, and it's been very helpful in working with clients or finding doctors or finding the right people if we need it. It's been more than just raising money for some consumer thing that is helpful to the world but not necessary when you're really saving lives. So the healthcare part of it was a little serendipity for me, but in hindsight, I find a lot of value in it.
That's terrific. And that's a little bit of a deeper story that I appreciate you sharing with the students, as well as they're looking toward a career pivot, beginning steps in their career. Now, kind of going back to what you experienced in your education, are there any skills or courses or experiences that you wish you would have taken advantage that you didn't, that you see would have been very valuable to you, either personally or professionally now?
Back in the day, I probably would have taken more business as undergrad earlier, but I don't think of that as such a negative at this point. You go to college, you don't know, right? And it sort of did what it was supposed to do. I don't know if I needed to go back and get my MBA after the training I got, if I was going to stay in that role. But for me, not having the full undergrad, I think it did give me the core understanding of, the analytics and the beliefs behind it. So I'm happy I did it. So I think I got what I needed out of it. I mean, the teamwork approach to the MBA was good. I learned different things from different people. But once you got into the investment banking world, that's where you're going to stay. The on-the-job training is it's almost like boot camp in the military, right? It's a lot of work and it's hard, and you're going to learn the most there. But I just thinking broad thinking and being, having the college education and all the courses I took just helped me in way different, the psychology classes helped me deal with people and have common sense that people are different and process things differently. And, some of the best teachers I had in some of the other areas that had nothing to do with it, I'm just thankful I had. So I don't think I would do much different at this based on where I was. So it prepared me well. It wasn't always perfect. I remember Jennifer Conrad, who was the most brilliant finance professor, teaching me how converts work. And then when I learned it on the job, they're like, yeah, that's the underlying academic view of it. And it's technically right. That's just not how they did it, right? They did it much cursory and just how it traded and knew. And so, but it was interesting to be able to understand that analytics behind it. Because if you didn't, it's the same thing. If you don't learn how to do something with a calculator, you don't understand how people can do the shortcuts and do it differently. So not a very insightful answer there, but I felt like there was not much I wish I did different at school. It was pretty helpful.
It sounds like the institutions did their
And
job.
I had Dean Shackelford for an option or for a tax strategy class that he had taught at Stanford. And so that was just an amazing class. So, and that was way before he was the dean. So those kind of classes were helpful. I took an options and trading class, which I never was going to use, but it was good to understand. So sometimes when we talk to our product partners and they're talking about hedging things, I at least had a cursory understanding of it, not just relying on them. I think it's helpful to have a base understanding of a lot of the different areas. But now the business school has so many options. There's corporate finance class, there's M&A class, there's classes to really prepare you for it. And I highly advise in today's world taking some of those classes before you get to an investment banking job, because they're kind of expected now.
Thank you. All right, we're going to open it for a few more questions. All right, so I'm going to go back. Neil, go ahead.
Yep, definitely. So I had a question on, I know we talked about if you would have done anything in school differently, but what about some of the deals you've worked on? Is there anything you'd change about how maybe you structured deals or executed the deals to maybe give a different outcome?
That's a hard one, because we've been fortunate to have a lot of the deals that we've done have had really good outcomes, and some of them had great outcomes for our clients, but maybe not great outcomes for the buyer, right? Either they overpaid or it didn't, because again, I was dealing with some growth companies that were risky. Sometimes products just didn't ultimately work, and we'd sell them before they were in clinical trials, et cetera. I have more positive experiences with deals where we've really aided our companies than negatives. There are some times where we took on, usually if we have a deal that's not a great situation, it's because we took it on too early, or we took it on when it wasn't ready for whatever reason. There was a strong investor in it that wanted us to do it, and we told them up front we didn't think it was going to happen, and it didn't. And those are painful to deal with, because you spend a lot of time and effort trying to get something to happen that you probably didn't believe in the first place, but people asked you to do it and you did it for a variety of reasons. Fortunately, at this point in our career, we don't do that as much, because we just turn them down, or they listen to us because we've got enough experience and trust with these investors. But there's been a few where, we went out with a price too high because we were pushed by the client, and it just didn't happen. And if we managed expectations a little better up front, they might have sold, we might have had a match and they would have sold. I'm just thinking of a company right now that I spent 2 years trying to sell, and it's a great company, and the board just was hell-bent on having a high price, and it was always ahead of where they were. And a lot of people were interested, and they turned down a bunch of great prices because we couldn't convince them lower. I don't think it was our fault. And then the IPO market got so hot, and they went out and traded significantly higher, and they looked brilliant. Well, now, the market's cooled down with interest rates going up, and the higher risk assets are trading, and it's trading, a little bit higher than what we would have sold it for. And he would have had 100% liquidity with no risk in the market if he had sold it back then. And In hindsight, I think they should have sold because the CEO owned 30% of the company and the investors owned a lot less, but the investors sort of drove the call. And I feel like somehow we didn't convince them that the deal was good enough. But in fairness to us, the market was just trading much higher than what they could sell in the private markets for. But we kept telling them things revert to the mean over time, but they couldn't really see it. So neither one was wrong. When they first went public, they were trading, and we thought they could get 600 to 800 million. They were trading at $1.7 billion. Well, now they're back at 800 million, and they could have had the 600 or 700 million 2 years ago, and none of this market risk and working on to the next thing. So that's an example. But we've been fortunate. Our team's been the #1 med tech team for 20 some years between my partner and I, different JP Morgan, B of A. And so we have a lot more great outcomes than we've had difficult ones. Most of the difficult ones we've taken on and they just never happened. And it was a time sink of work. And you're always to blame, not the company, right? You didn't get it done. You didn't sell it well enough. You didn't, and those are painful, especially when you knew it up front and you didn't say no. And we've learned past that. And it's hard in the beginning when you're trying to build a reputation. Sometimes you take things on that are a little riskier, and if you get it done, it really helps you in the career. And so it goes both ways in the middle of your career. At this point in my career, I don't want to have anything to do with those deals that are that risky because they're time sinks, and the downsides is probably sometimes more than the upside. But you make different trade-offs along the ways.
Hi, Jeff. You mentioned that you've been working in the healthcare space since roughly 1995. Over the past 25 years, what are some of like the biggest changes that you've seen in like the industry, and then also in terms of just the banking role itself? Because I'm sure there's been, there's been a lot of technological advancements and so forth. Just wanted to see how that's impacted banking.
Well, the merger of data collection and now AI, which is a buzzword, but data collection, and you have the Googles and Apples trying to get into healthcare because of the data collection and the IT side of it. And that's something that's tremendously different because it's really hard. They don't understand what they don't know about the FDA and the HIPAA rules and the privacy rules and how to safeguard your data, because they just, whip it. And so they don't know that. And the healthcare companies don't understand the consumer side. And that's been blending now with the internet and the education. So, one of my biggest clients is Dexcom, and they make the continuous glucose sensor. And they spend almost as much time in CES as they do on the clinical side, because they have to have a phone app to measure your glucose and have it work with Android and Apple and work with sensing and then work with the pumps. And so there's a huge technology curve when I first started in 95, I did a healthcare information systems deal, and we went towards Stanford, and it was all paper. All your medical records, everything was paper. And it's still bad 20 some years later. You have medical records that are electronic, but you have so many arcane different systems, they don't work together. And that's the biggest change, is working with our healthcare services and our tech. The technologies are overlapping. I used to sell just only devices, but now devices have an HCIT, information technology bent to it, or an AI bent to it, or how is it going to get paid for? So we need to understand how our services team looks at that. So the biggest changes on the technology side keeps getting better onto the tech side of it. And then I would say the reimbursement and the cost of healthcare is a massive change. If you got a device approved when I first started, you could almost not charge what you want, but you could just charge. And now can you charge something that's medically relevant? So they used to have these little devices that go in your eye to take out your lens when you get a cataract lens put in. And it's literally like a little vacuum cleaner, and it works fine. And now they have lasers that do it much, and it might save a tiny % of safety and so forth, but costs a fortune more. And, you can't just go out and get that approved and then sell it for a fortune more when cataract's one of the biggest procedures the government pays for in Medicare. So, the government will say, do it the old way. It works. And so in the old days, you just get it approved, and if it was a little bit safer, they'd pay for it. We can't keep doing that. So you also have to health, you have to have economic justification for your products, and as opposed to just a little better efficacy. It's got to have both to be able to sell and be a successful product in today's world. So those understandings become important as a banker if you're going to judge what company to work with.
Thank you.
And I'm not seeing any more hands. Any more questions? Oh, and Neil?
I had a question on some of the financing aspects of like biotechs. Sometimes I see that they may run out of runway that they have. They raise capital and they can't get through either phase 1, 2, or 3 of the clinical trials. How do you kind of do you have a role in kind of helping them guide through that process? And if so, what are some of the typical challenges you see with clinical trials?
Yeah, so the hard thing for me is I oversaw the biotech effort at JP Morgan, but I'm the device guy. So I don't know it as well. What I can tell you is different times in the market, different type stage companies could go public, right? So on a biotech company, how big is the market? How big is the upside? How robust is the data? You might be able to go public on a phase 2 trial if it's so robust and it's a hot market and it's a big market with a huge need. Or you might be able to go to phase 1, or they say, no, this is a smaller niche market, or we've never had an Alzheimer's drug really approved until Biogen is so hard. You need to have really good phase 3 data. So it's dependent on the market size of the product, and the data set you've collected, and how high is. Sometimes it's just a big pharma company has no pipeline in something and desperately needs it, and may go buy something super early to fill their pipeline because they trade differently. Medical device companies they do that some, but not as much. So a long-winded way of saying there's a lot of variables, but in the biotech world, you need to be very aware of the market, what's selling, what's need. I mean, obviously vaccines, no one thought Moderna had been around for 10, 20 years, never made profit, never had approved product until the technology was needed for COVID. And now they're selling billions and billions and billions of dollars of it. And the government stepped up and funded that, actually, not the private sector. But then they went out, and once their stock was up, and raised money. So biotech companies are going to be ready. We advise them to raise money whenever they can. So when the market windows are open for their area, take it. I've never seen a biotech money say I have too much money, but I've heard, thousands and thousands of times, I wish I had more. I didn't have as much. So long-winded way of saying there's a lot of variables, but in the biotech space, my partners are well-versed in it. Like, they know cancer might be hot, or they know ophthalmology may be hot, or diabetes might be hot, or areas that have had a really, really hard time ever getting approved, and you just need to be further along mature, right? And you also have to work with your big cap pharma partners and know where their holes are and what their interests are, right? There was a big dearth of, AbbVie, when they had the biggest drug in the world, Humira, but it was becoming generic. And so it got spun out of Abbott, and they needed to fill a massive pipeline, and they had so much cash from Humira that they just went out and spent a lot of money. And they had some work and some not work, and they overpaid for some, but a couple of them, became huge opportunities. So you needed to know, if you were in the cancer world, you wouldn't talk to AbbVie when they were trying to fill a huge pipeline void. But that doesn't mean that all cancer companies could go public. And so you really have to have a pretty broad knowledge base of the whole landscape and what's market's hot, what the consolidators or the bigger cap pharma's needs are, and what the past history in those drug areas are, and what you need to go. And sometimes markets just get so overheated that tons of phase 1 can go. Then a couple of them will fail and the market will close, and you need to be more mature. And it cycles like that in biotech. Because I was told, even if it has the best, most robust data that really, really high level people have looked at work, still only a 30-ish% chance of it working. So it's a portfolio approach in biotech. And when they work, they're phenomenal. People who got in Moderna and held into it, look what it's done. And that happens in a lot of different areas. Amgen and Gilead were tiny little companies, and now they're big cap pharmas. So, but you got to be prepared to fail, even with some of the most robust data you've seen, because there's so many pathways in the cells that don't come up until you do a randomized trial.
be kind of pointing to courses that might be in business schools at the nexus of healthcare being advantageous for students to take, like global healthcare, or even because you're using a lot of, like, to me, keywords that you've learned over your experience in the field. Would you suggest a student take like a global healthcare or others that they could learn a little bit more about drug development, device development, or even just
If they offer it, yes, if that's your interest, right? I mean, if you don't know where you're going to end up, you could be taking it in that and then be narrow. But I know the business school is trying to do a cross program with the med school, and I think that's great because I think but it was so broad that I think it's getting a general understanding. It's kind of hard to get super technical in school of what I've learned over 20 or 30 years and so forth. So your summer internship, if you end up in a healthcare group or a vertical, you'll learn it. I do think it's good if you can get some class. I mean, the healthcare services space is so complicated and changing right now, and it's critical to the success or the bankruptcy of this country. And I have to take my healthcare services partners to my clients sometimes because they live and die it, and I don't know it that well. So I think it's good to get a global understanding, but just realize you're going to get it at a high level, which I don't think is bad. You'll narrow down it's the same thing in technology. You start being a banker and all of a sudden become a semiconductor banker. And you start realizing how, the physics of those work and the chips work. And so it's always going to be more specific once you get into it. But if you want to be a healthcare banker, it cannot hurt to take some healthcare cross classes in business if the school is offering it, or vice versa in other industries. But I think it's important just to get a broad brush of, you could be a double major, be pre-med and business, and that if you want to be a biotech banker or medtech, sure, that is helpful. People will love biotech bankers who have a science background. For example, you don't have to know the FDA path, but when I first sat in a meeting and they started talking about, crossing the blood-brain barrier and, big molecules, it just was like this to me. And I know people, if they were pre-med or science, or even some people who started med school, it's helpful in biotech to have that kind of technology, just like it's helpful to be an engineer in semiconductor space. So if there's a sector you want to focus on, having some experience in that sector is definitely helpful, because you could learn the finance at the firm, and you can also know the industry better than most of your finance people by having experience in it.
So another call for questions, and Kusal.
Hi, Jeff. So this is Kusal Senanayaka. I am going to attempt to ask any question without the background noise here interfering. I have a little one around. I apologize in advance. What advice would you give to someone who is already in the biotech and the pharmaceutical side, but who is interested to come into that biotech banker, investment banker kind of space that you were talking about right now? The reason why I ask is I'm actually working for Biogen right now, and I have almost 10 years of experience in that space, but I'm really, really interested in the biotech banking side of it. So I just trying to figure out how to break into that side, the investment side of it.
Yeah, so it's a blessing and a curse, right? Is that if you're in the MBA program, it's late to the basic process, but you're more of a lateral. But you're more of a lateral with 10 years of experience in pharma or at Biogen. So I literally think, it's going to LinkedIn, it's going to the alumni database, and it's looking for biotech bankers at firms that you have any kind of connection to, and reaching out to them at every level, right? Because you'd be shocked and finding out what sometimes when I was running it at JP Morgan and we had a VP who quit or went somewhere else and you needed someone, it is nice to have that clinical background. And what you need to do is show them that you're probably willing to start at a lower level than 10 years of experience would be in banking, because you don't have the nuts and bolts finance. But look, we've had people who finished med school and decided, I'm not going to make what I want to make being a doctor, and go into to banking. So I think you need to go in accepting the fact that you don't have the deal experience, but you have the clinical experience, and you're willing to go do the spade work and learn. And I think you just need to make that clear, and literally don't, contact as many people as you can. I mean, a UNC alum is going to want to talk to you, right? Just because they love the school and so forth, and you got to just contact them.
Right.
You call Robbie Huffine, who's one of the senior bankers at the healthcare group at JP Morgan, and say he does big cap pharma, and tell him your background. He's
fantastic.
And I literally think you go to LinkedIn and you find out people that cover Biogen, or all who did a Biogen deal, or who just go to everywhere you can and put yourself out there and find something. It's a needle in the haystack, but it can play out. I mean, and it usually will, because you have a skill set a lot of people don't have, as long as you're willing to learn the skill set that you don't have.
Yep. Fantastic. Thanks, Jeff. Just for the record, I'm actually applying for the UNC's the executive doctoral program in global health leadership. So I'm really interested to build a network in that side as well. But thank you. I really appreciate that advice.
No problem.
And just to let people know, I did put the Career Networks link again, because we do have a connect area. It doesn't matter if you're in a UNC program, outside of a UNC program, you can connect with industry leaders, with alumni, in all of these verticals in which we're speaking, and today would be investment banking. So check it out, go under connect, and you can find some of those folks to speak with. So I'm throwing it back to Arvind again, because he's got another question.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff. So obviously, when you were going through your background, you mentioned that, you started your career off at a bulge bracket, moved around a little bit, and then eventually ended up at Guggenheim, which is, considered a very elite boutique. Can you maybe touch upon some of the differences between, I guess, the cultures between like a bulge bracket and an elite boutique, and maybe give us some of your personal thoughts on some of the things that you've encountered that really separate some of these other institutions from the other?
Sure. So I think you have a great culture or a bad culture at big or small. So I don't think big necessarily is better or small is better from a culture standpoint. When I went to Goldman Sachs, it was private. It's just an amazing culture at that firm, right? And I still think it is. It's different now that they're public and much bigger, but there was an elite, partnership culture there of learning. And JP Morgan sort of has that too. I went to Montgomery Securities. I hated the culture there, but I went to Piper Jaffray, when I left Montgomery, because I had worked with them on some firm, and they were fantastic at medical devices, being based in Minnesota, where so many of them, and they had a bulge bracket medical device team with great people, and I worked with them a lot. And I hated the culture at Montgomery, and sometimes you just can't tell until you get in. And so I've liked the majority of the places I've worked. I mean, Guggenheim's had a great culture. I was worried about it, right? My partner and I, when we went to Guggenheim, left for different reasons. The big banks, we had done our whole careers there. We were unbelievably successful there. And post the financial crisis, the financial reward for our level was higher once we were established being at a boutique than it was but that's not the case, when you're starting out your careers. And I think the big firms are phenomenal for starting out your careers, because you get so much experience across so many different product areas or platforms. Your clients use them for everything. Jamie Dimon is probably the best CEO I've ever encountered in any industry, period. And it was a pleasure to work for that firm and them. But Jamie has the belief that, it's more than the individual, it's the bank and the lending and the platform and all that stuff. And they paid more. They paid in a meritocracy, but it was more also how the firm did, how the stock did, and everyone. And at some of the boutiques, the compensation can be higher. They're not regulated as a bank, and it's our brand is phenomenal. We can offer most of the products, but we are not a Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan in brand that has literally every product you need, right? From literally a banking window to derivatives trade. We just don't have everything. And so it's all, the people at our firm are almost as important as the brand, and they're able to compensate differently. So I think at different parts of your career, different firms make different sense. When I was the reason I left Piper, I was very happy there. And maybe the compensation wouldn't have been as high at some other places because it was a smaller firm, but I could have done it forever. Problem was before the financial crisis in the 2000s, there was a huge movement from the clients to the bigger banks, and they weren't using the growth banks, no matter how good you were, for their financing alternatives, because they just trusted the bigger platforms. And so we took our whole team to JP Morgan, and it was like taking this great, brilliant team to there, and then all of a sudden putting it on a platform that couldn't go wrong, and it exploded our business. Then you had the financial crisis, and you were less rewarded for being brilliant, and it was level the playing field about being on a platform. And then the boutiques became, sort of in vogue again, or had a brain drain to have a lot of the best M&A tacticians or advisory people go to them. And you'd have the companies use both, right? A big company would use some of the best minds in the business and some of the boutiques, and then go use the financing platforms at a JP Morgan and compensate both of them. So different points of your career, different times. The most important thing I would tell you, and I just had this discussion with my son, is sometimes the group or the firm is less important than the people you work with. This is a job you can't only do for money. It is hard, and you want to work with people that you respect and enjoy and have fun with, because otherwise, you'll burn out. And it's better today. They try to make a better work-life balance, which is appropriate for, I think, your generation and so forth. And that's what we've learned in the business. But it's still, if your client calls you on a Friday and says, I'm going to buy this company and we have to do it by Monday morning, I don't care if you're supposed to have a weekend off, you're going to want to do it because you've spent probably 4 months trying to help advise this client to think about it, right? And so there are times when your life and the timing of it's just out of your control, and it's hard. So you want to do it with people you enjoy doing it with. And I sort of found my way into a sector that it was more because I found my way into people and cultures I wanted to be at. And I left a bad culture pretty darn quickly. I was at Montgomery for a year or two, and I was like, this is eat what you kill. It's not a team. It's not a this. And they were good at what they did, but it was all individuals. So I say, I went back to do electric utilities because I love my boss and he was a great mentor, not because I liked electric utilities. And so working with good people and in a fun environment is critical, because it's a hard job.
Thank you, sir.
That was a truly thoughtful answer. And I think the students very much would appreciate that. So I do see it's 6:57. And so I'd like to wrap this up with asking you just a final question. And again, this could be in your personal life or in your professional life, but what are some of your favorite books, online publications, resources, things that you check in on daily to kind of guide you in your life?
That's interesting. So less now, right? And I was, as I'm doing less. I mean, back in the day for the job, staying up to speed with the Journal and the Economist, and you have new resources now, Cap IQ and deals and all the things. I think that's helpful for the business side of it. There's a lot of those things, and staying up to speed on those things. And like I said, it's the same thing. If you saw a deal that's interesting, once you see the deal announcement, go see what the research analysts say and those kind of things. What I have been trying to do with the world becoming so polarized, we all have our views. So for example, I'm about to start reading Obama's biography, and I have it sitting next to my desk. And I despise that administration being in the banking world, where we were just the focus of their ire and the politicization. I mean, we got blamed for everything in it, and I know way more about it, and it just wasn't real. What he would say, Obama would say he met with Jamie, and Jamie said something, and Jamie'd come back to us and say, I didn't say that. I mean, it was like those kind of. I felt about that the way the majority of the world probably feels about Trump, just the way they handled the banking industry. Not Obama as a person; he's a much higher integrity, but I want to read his biography so I could hear his side of it, as opposed to living in my own echo chamber, right? And so what I've been trying to do, and I encourage people to do now, is read the opposite of what's going on and what your beliefs are, because we're living in a world where the social media and the stories and things are just my mom and brother Googled climate change together on their each respective laptops, and the answers were completely different, because my mom's a Fox News one and my brother's not, and you should see what it said, and it all looked real, right? And so do your primary research. And COVID vaccine, you can find data going both ways, but don't listen to what Fox says, and don't listen to what CNN says, do your own work. So I read Bill Gates' An Elegant Defense. It was a book he recommended, which is on the immune system. It was written pre-COVID, and it was unbelievably educational about your body and how vaccines were developed and all this stuff. And it had nothing to do with COVID. It was written before. So what I've tried to do now is, because I can be as blinded or opinionated as anyone, is try to take the other. I mean, I watched some of these documentaries on Clarence Thomas and Donald Trump in support of them, just to see the other side of it. And these documentaries are biased, but you learn things, where certain things come from. And I just think it's helpful. I have a certain opinion of someone, and it may not be very positive, but then I want to go hear their side of the story. So it changed. I used to not think highly of Elon Musk, and then I've listened to some of his stories and podcast stuff, and I have a totally different opinion of him, as opposed to what I just get from the social media world. So that's what I would encourage people to do, especially in today's day and age, is try to listen to the other side more, because then it might embolden and make your position even stronger. But you also can understand we are so bifurcated right now, and who's to say who's right or wrong? The extremes are probably both wrong, and the middle's right, but it's the silent majority in the middle that's not doing much, and understanding how to know both sides of it. And that's what I'm trying to do, is get a little bit of the other side of what I think, to challenge myself.
Well, terrific. And those are wonderful words and sentiments to, I think, end this fireside chat tonight on. Jeff, I just want to thank you for myself, for the audience, for the Center of the Business of Health. And I want to thank too Erin Leach. She just has been wonderful. She has put all of these together. So again, thank you to the audience. This was fantastic tonight. And I'll let everybody go and watch the game, I guess. I don't know, Jeff, if that's what you'll be doing, but again, thanks to everybody and have a great evening.
I'm watching it taped, and please, no one send me a thank you note. I don't need one. I really don't. And go Heels.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Good night.
Talk soon. Good night.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.